Thanks for joining us, everybody, out in the field. Back in Wenatchee, back with Tom Alexander. Had a great time last week, invited him to come back. Let's learn more from Tom about Wenatchee Gold. Oh my God, Tom, seriously. I mean, has anybody contacted you about learning about the gold in the last 30 years?
Like, no, you're the first one. Well, that guy I mentioned last week, the Canadian that had he wanted to, what he really wanted was just to have a blessing on what he was doing over there. But
it just seems like this is. I mean, Tepper mentioned this last time after we visited with you. He says, I can't believe such a major gold operation is like right at the end of a street.
I know, I know. We were lucky. Those of us who worked here were lucky to, and I stayed. It's a fantastic place to live. But yeah, I mean, you go home and have a normal life. I have a friend that worked at Bald Mountains Mine out of Elko, and she'd ride a bus 60 miles into the mine site, stay for her shift, and then, or go back to Elko. Right. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's just all gone now, and it feels like all the people are gone, and like the whole thing is just, so to find you through Al is just an amazing stroke of luck.
Yeah, and I think Roger Gill, who was one of the exploration geologists, is still here.
Okay.
He went to work for one of the geotechnical consulting firms. Yeah, for a long time, but he's older than I am, so he's probably he's retired. He stopped by when he was hunting up at my house one time when he was hunting up my way, but I haven't seen him. So he would have a lot more information on the structure and the the mineralization on the trend and all that stuff, because he was responsible for that. I was just exclusively a production guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look a little bit more.
Okay,
what you
so
got here.
here's Jeff Tepper's andesite, and you can see that it's brecciated in this.
Oh boy.
I couldn't find a spray bottle that didn't have bleach in it.
This is Derby Canyon water here.
Yeah, this is from groundwater. Yeah, but that's the andesite, so that's probably down fairly deep. So it's the same material as saddle rock.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Jeff was asking, it continues over here underground. And
it crops out up there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that Rooster Comb?
I think that's called Rooster Comb, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah,
but
there's two of them.
Spire right here is the same andesite as saddle rock.
That's andesite. That is rhyodacite.
Got it.
And so the mineralized rock in the district is in this little, between these two igneous groups. Although when you go over the ridge to D Reef is directly over the ridge in Squilchuck. When you go over there, there's no igneous rock, either to the west or east, that we encountered in drilling, and that may be because we didn't drill far enough.
So here we are in the andesite, or the whatever.
That's andesite. That's the rock to the west.
And no gold in this?
No. Well, there is. Actually, I shouldn't. Yeah.
Okay.
We saw assays up to several hundredths of an ounce, 400ths of an ounce, 500ths of an ounce, in proximity to it. In proximity to the ore zone at depth.
Okay.
So mineralizing fluids, if you imagine this is there, there was some evidence, and I think I mentioned it last week, there was some evidence that this is actually subaerial or subaqueous in some drill core, and I'm not gonna bet anything on that, because the thought had been, I think, prior that it was an intrusive, a dichorous sill.
Well, sure. Yeah. What would you see in an andesite that proves it's subaqueous?
We saw some bedding up against it. So imagine this is maybe a flow breccia in water or something.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just wildly hypothesizing.
No, we're good.
And I don't know why I kept these specimens, other than if there was anything. I would fail my field methods class because I didn't label everything. But here, what are those class in the andesite? They're not andesite, eh?
Maybe it's Joaquin.
Yeah. It looks like looks different than the sandstone, doesn't it?
It does.
So did it pick that up on the way up?
Yeah.
Or is it a pebble that was in the sediment that it picked up?
Mm-hmm.
The larger conglomerate the pebbles and larger pieces were rounded, well rounded. They weren't angular. A lot of volcanic rock in the conglomerate.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the criteria, now that I just thought of it.
Yep.
Aggressant, Swak didn't have volcanic cobbles or, pebbles or whatever in it. And the Chumstick did, we saw, and all the sediments around here we saw, where we saw things of size, conglomerate or whatever. There were a large majority of it was volcanic. This is Jeff's gabbro. I think that's what he was referring to as the gabbro, a porphyritic. I call it somewhere between a basalt and an andesite. Those are pyroxene, I believe. I brought a hand lens. I don't know if I ever actually looked at the faces to see if if it's a pyroxene angle, but it looks like it's 93, 87 degrees on pyroxene. See, I remember my mineralogy, dude. 16120 on hornblende.
Yeah, there you go. Where did you go to school to get trained?
Portland State.
Portland State.
Mike Cummings was my dude.
All right.
Did you ever run into him?
A little bit.
Yeah, he's funny. He called us twits. However, he told me about this job. I owe him big time. He said, "You ought to apply for that job, Tom." I was working in Idaho, so yeah, here I am. My life was changed by that guy for the better, for definitely. Yeah,
that's good.
I should call him up and say hi.
Yes,
he's retired now.
I'll find him and send him this.
Exactly. I think he's still in Portland. Somebody said.
We all have important people in our past that, sometimes
we're
not that good about, tracking them down and saying thanks.
Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you were undergrad or graduate student?
I just undergrad.
Yeah.
My whole story, I was working in Idaho for a small company called Audine. AU is in Goldine. And Mike told me about this job, and I had applied to grad school several places. One, I was interested in accretion tectonics, and so Merle Beck at Western, the paleomag dude, and I looked at University of California at Santa Cruz and Alaska Fairbanks, and I thought the paleomag just sounded boring. I went up to just drilling little oriented core, going, the North Pole used to be over there. So I'd applied, I had a TA ship and everything, and I got the job here. I didn't go. I didn't even send him a letter. I was so bad. I just didn't even go.
To study with Merle or the Fairbanks one? Or which?
Well, I was going to go to Fairbanks.
Fairbanks,
yeah. And I didn't even go. I got the job. Jing, jing. Made big bucks. Started at $22,000 a year. And I had a boss. My second boss is like, "You're the lowest paid guy. You're the lowest paid salary guy underground. The drillers are drillers and the miners are." And so he got me a big raise. I appreciated it.
Nice. Yeah. So what year did you start here at the
I'm
Wenatchee?
83. So they had two geologists here in production, and then they divided the geology department that they had here into production and exploration. And so they hired two of us, and I hired me for the production side and another guy that graduated from Wazoo for the exploration side. Yeah.
So 83 till the mid-90s?
I was here till 93, and
wow.
the mine shut down last production was done in 94. And then they backfilled and all that stuff.
And
I was here 9.5 years, almost 10 years.
And pretty staggering profits and numbers that whole decade, or was there like a high water mark?
No, it was this deposit is super sweet. I mean, if the rock was silicified and we didn't have a lot of ground issues, we'd just blow it up and put it in a bucket and take it to the hoist and send it to the mill. We didn't have a lot of ore grade problems underground. It was more ground control. Again, if you went outside the silicified rock, it was scary. The sheared mudstones and stuff. I mean, you could take a G-pick and just go like this.
Scary about collapse.
Yeah,
I
was.
See.
So, a lot of what we did was that. But as I mentioned last week, we forward sold gold.
Yeah.
So the financial people wanted to know what our expected production was going to be, and I think if I remember right, they forward sold about 70% of our expected production. Yeah. And interesting, mining companies, I didn't mention this last week, mining companies don't forward sell anymore because after a number of years of most companies doing that, they realized it was probably suppressing prices.
Oh.
So they quit.
Oh.
They think they started to believe they'd have more opportunity and more upside on the price side if they let the market, fluctuate, due to, events in the news and other things. So
sure.
Economic. There's some free gold in this specimen too. This is a cool little piece, but you can see the sulfides, but there's very fine free gold along. If you get it just right in the light, you can see it, but they're just, they're less than they're a fraction of a millimeter.
Are they little wires?
No, they're just little. I think well, maybe they are, and they've all been cut off. But if there were wires, I think you'd see strands where unless they're all perpendicular or subperpendicular. And you won't see it in an outcrop. And if it had outcropped, we would have. I guess it's cropped out.
Right.
We would have mined it.
Right.
This is very high grade rock. This would have run probably over an ounce a ton. I don't know. I don't have any idea, but it was definitely high grade material. So that's the best of what we produced.
So why is this look not here at the surface cropping out? Why is this? What kind of depth are we talking about? Or like? I'm shocked by this, and why can't we get hints of this up here at the surface?
Well, the hints are not as spectacular, and they're lower grade. So remember, if you watched last week's episode, go back.
Previously.
Go back. Yeah, exactly. Last week's episode, we need one of those little pre-clue or pre-introductions on what happened last week. But we talked about this as an epithermal system, right? So you're relatively low temps. Near the surface, and as the mineralizing fluids came up along the conduit, which we believe is a fault associated with the Eagle Creek structure, they spread out. So I see it, and I don't think I'm the only one, but see it as sort of a chanterelle mushroom-shaped thing.
Right. As
the pressures became less, and there was less confinement between I don't know, the hanging and footwall of the fault or the Rio Day site and the east side, the Wenatchee Dome wasn't there yet. I was gonna, so we had this thing that went up like this, and at depth, imagine that the lithostatic pressure is reduced to the point where the fluids start to boil. The pH and the EH in the fluids changes. The gold starts to mineralize. In some places in the quartz, so. Let's back up. So the first time those fluids came up through the sediments, they had a relatively open sandstone unit. I don't know, I'm guessing it was about 75 feet thick in the B North zone, and there are multiple zones we mined. The fluids flowed along those beds. And then later events, there was still pressure put on these silicified, now brittle sandstone beds, and the fluids were combined to fractures within those beds. And those are where we get the veining along those fractures. So the initial mineralizing event gave it a grade of around, say 1/10 of an ounce a ton.
Okay.
And then the later events were much higher grade. And they were constrained by the lithology and the structure. And as the fluids rose, the gold dropped out. So we talked last week about how epithermal systems, and this is old information, so science has moved on and left me behind, was about 1,500 feet.
Yeah.
So the elevation above sea level of the lowest mineralization we saw was about 0 feet, 70 feet or so, down near sea level.
Okay.
The top of A reef, which I'm thinking is an upper, more distal portion of the chanterelle mushroom.
Okay.
If you imagine it coming up like that, is the upper part. Most of the gold is dropped out. There is bulk silicification of the sediment there. There is some grade, but there isn't the veining and the high grade material. And there is a drift. We backfilled it just to make it safe, but there was a little added in there. And I went in with a couple of guys and we sampled it. And I can't remember specifically, but the grades were generally less than 1/10. And there are some little quartz veins, but nothing like this.
Oh my God. Now, so there's multiple generations, obviously. This is like a 101 class.
Right.
You got, there we go.
So this is one that's not nearly as dramatic as this. This is from a underground drill core, the smaller core, if you see any specimens. So which way's up on this thing? This way's there. There you go.
Okay.
I think Larry Ott did this. I'm not positive, but it's a piece of drill core going into a vein, and he looked at it and looked at the number of events. So going from the outside, it may not be chronological, but it could be. There's one event, there's a second event, kind of a brecciation band of veining, a third event, a fourth event, fifth event, and in this one I think he sees 5 events. I think that's what he gets to. Well, he's calling that a 6th event.
Okay.
And then he goes back out to 5th. So 5th, 4th, 3rd, and so on the other side of the vein's missing.
So there's nothing in what I'm holding that's igneous, as far as the rhyodacite or the andesite or anything like that.
We didn't see any igneous rock in the ore zone itself.
Wow.
I mentioned last week that we had some assays from the andesite.
Right.
Which predates mineralization. I don't know if Ralph or Jeff Tepper's work corroborates that. I think he had a younger date for the andesite than
he did. Yeah. He had 44-ish for pretty much everything right here.
Yeah. So.
But anyway, we you've got the field relations. He's just got.
Yeah. Well, we our focus was on, in mining, it's called rock in the box, right? So your job is to get ore into the box that goes to the mill and waste into the other box that goes to the waste pile, right? So that's what we do. I mean, science, whatever. If it finds more ore, your bosses are happy, but otherwise they just want to put rock in the box. Okay. It's not. I want to give the viewers something to watch.
Good. We'll try sun and shade with each of these, but I see. Good.
That's the rhyodacite, and you can see some banding in it. And I don't have any specimens of the perlite. The perlite was beautiful. It was a dark green, shiny, vitreous, kind of granular.
What does the banding in the rhyodacite?
Well, I think it's sort of related to flow, eh? Mm-hmm. So it's shouldering. It was relatively near surface, so it shouldered its way up. It broke the deposit a little bit, as imagine rhyodacite is pretty viscous.
Yeah, well,
Bowen's reaction series, all that stuff, So it's pretty viscous, so it's shouldering its way up, and it's being pumped in there by tectonic and magmatic forces. So
not to beat it over the head too much here,
go ahead.
but if we get too far away from this is our payday right here, basically.
That's the highest
shot full of this stuff. So if we get too far away from these incredible silicified veins, we're into just quote unquote worthless drumstick.
Not unless if it's silicified, we'd take it.
Yeah.
So this vein is, I can't give you a percentile, but this is exceptional.
Yes.
Most of the veining was smaller. It was more like this and even like that. Okay. So the veining tended to be smaller. And it was, at least on the 500 level, and I don't want to generalize too much, but on the 500 level, if you remember, we had an anticline. If you're looking to the north, you had this anticline come around like this, plunging about 70 degrees to the southwest. Mm-hmm. And the rock was silicified, but the grade on the south limb of that anticline was 1/10 of an ounce. You'd go around into the fold, sort of the sin form there, plunging also steeply, but not as steeply, maybe 50 degrees or 45 degrees, and that's where all the fractures developed. So you had the silicified rock that was brittle being torqued on with forces, fractures develop, and the mineralizing fluids follow those fractures subsequently. And that's where you'd see the highest grade. So you'd go around the anticlinal nose and it'd be 1/10, and you go 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, maybe 1 ounce, and depending on where you were in the deposit.
So it's 1983. You just show up here out of undergrad. You've had a structure class, a field geology class, and petrology stuff, maybe a volcanology class, but you're basically the age of the kids I have in my 351 class. Are you learning this from scratch? Are you figuring all this out on your own, or is like you have got some mentor who says, "Here's the deal"?
No, I wasn't. I was hired as the junior mine geologist, and so I had mentors. But I remember soundtrack. Yeah, one of Tom Peters' books.
Keep it down. We got important business over here, Jughead.
But he talks about NASA and how you took these young engineers and you gave them a goal, and we figured things out here. The software I used was developed for pits. I turned it on its side and used it in underground. I mean, with support from the vendor, right? Michel David's company, Geostat Systems, and they had an American branch, but he's a famous geostatistician. But my boss sent me off to school, and after some point, I just looked at a freaking computer. I was just a numbers model building guy mostly. I'd still go underground to escape, but and see what's going on.
But you had some freedom to kind of use your own curiosity and intellect and abilities to kind of figure something. Just like a puzzle, you're trying to figure out.
So and it was exciting, and that whole idea of that, the epithermal system with the mushroom shape. That actually, when I was talking to Roger Gill one day, and that was his model, and it just clicked. So I didn't come up with that. It's just like, Roger, that's it. It's just broken up with structure. So no, I didn't come up with all this stuff.
Right.
Well, it was a collective. Sure. Yeah. I was here for 10 years, so you see stuff. But this is where some of our first drill holes were, and I don't know if that shows up. It's a cross section through B North ore zone, so it's just out there under Appalachia, where those, just out across the street there. Okay. It's just that's the B North. And we put a drift, all our development workings are in the Rio Day site. We cross-cut into the ore zone, so we put a drift out here, and then we put a drift in north-south, so it's running this way. And we drilled fans of holes. We had an underground drill. We drilled fans of holes on 50-foot centers off that drift. And I was doing most of the core logging. We drilled 45,000 feet of core on this.
Good God.
Yeah, for delineation, right?
Seriously?
We had holes. We had a few holes from the surface, and then we were able to go underground enough to indicate this deserves a mine, right? So that decision was made. That was when I was hired, when the decision to develop had been made. But as I'd map this stuff, it was pretty exciting. I'd see bedded material with veining down below, but up near the top of the ore zone, I'd see this breccia zone. And so, I don't know, my hypothesis maybe still is you had these fluids moving up through this 75 or whatever, I can't even remember really, 150 foot thick section. It was dipping, so it gives the apparent thicknesses.
Okay.
But there was a breccia all along the top, and this above was altered and sheared mudstones. So and if you go look at outcrops in the district, in highway cuts wherever, you'll see big thick sections of sheared mudstone or mudstones. And so was this the barrier to the mineralizing fluids? And as later stresses were applied to the deposit, this took this, the strain was here, not in the block.
Wow.
Hard block. That's I'm just speaking off the top of my head.
Right. So that guy who was obsessed with the breccias in the rhyolite or whatever.
Oh yeah, and I actually looked him up, and I owe him a little bit. He's done some.
You looked him up since last week?
I looked him up on Google. Yeah, he had left Wazoo, but under his little profile, it's like he's a Skarn guy. But he went to work. He was working in the Department of Interior, and he quit with another fellow in protest to former Secretary of Interior Zinke, trying to control what they were publishing.
Okay.
Yeah, Larry Meinert. Yeah, so Dr. Meinert, I apologize for any, but it's just, it's like a lot of academics, they've seen a lot of stuff, and they want to, we had a guy here, I apologize, Dr. Meinert, but we had a guy come here once, and the vice president was in a meeting with us, and he starts talking about ductile shear zones and serpentinite and stuff, and I'm just like, I finally just said, there are no serpentinites associated with this deposit. And he gave me a really dirty look, but he just wanted to talk.
I mean, that's it. There's a disconnect between my world and your world quite often, and it's just a lack of respect. I mean, you guys are on the ground, you're doing all this work, you got somebody coming in who's just basically coming out of the vehicle lecturing
Yeah.
as he turns off the engine. It's like,
Yeah.
give me a break, man.
Yeah, but I get that. You know, everybody has their base of knowledge from their experiences, right? And so first thing you try to do is always apply that when you get to a new project. And
Yes.
one of my teachers, I think professors, I think it was Dr. Benson, always talked about the working hypothesis. You know, you get more information, you throw that one out. Like the Canadian geologist I met who saw these sheared mudstones as schists. Dude, where do you see a mica?
No.
yeah.
You're right. We all come from our own, knowledge base, but how about opening your ears, keeping your mouth shut for at least a couple of minutes and listening to the people who are here, who've learned all this real information from this real place. So this is, thanks for taking the time to sketch these for us. This is super helpful. And
the deposit changes shape as you get depth. It becomes, it's more tabular up in the B North and B4 in cross section, and as you go with depth, it becomes narrower and more tooth-like.
That's the mushroom.
Yeah, it's the mushroom. That's the stem of the mushroom, and you're getting up in the cap of the mushroom up here, and it spreads out even more if you imagine it going up to A reef. And that's assuming A reef is part of the same system, and I would make sense to me.
So generally, this very important top of the breccia is still 1,000 feet below surface?
No, this is a 650 level, so that's 400 feet below. This is a 650, so that's 400 feet below surface.
Okay.
And the alluvium, the QAL here, is about 150 feet thick. So it's 200 feet below the QAL. The early prospectors looked at these things, right? They realized there was gold in them. They had enough knowledge to know if you see the silicified sediments, there's probably something going on, probably related to that old association with quartz and gold, so they see quartz veining. So Tenneco picked up this property in, I don't know, the 70s or something. And they drilled some holes. They actually went into B Reef and down into B West and drilled some holes, and their exploration people, evaluation people passed that over to corporate, and they declined it. So it was sitting here until 82, 83.
Why do you think they declined it?
I don't know. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
They just didn't. They didn't think it was going to be a good deposit, and maybe they didn't have the models that we had. I don't know, or my boss had. He found the deposit, largely responsible for it.
Yeah.
And so he came in, and his name's Ed Follis, and he actually struck up a conversation with the guy who was president of Appalachian Riders, this horse riding stable. And he was a good guy, and he got the president to agree to let them put a drill out there. And they had brought in 2 drills. One drill, I wasn't here. One drill I think was too far west, didn't get anything. The other one, bingo. Free gold innovating, went down into B North.
Into B North.
This section, yeah.
Right over here.
Right across the on that is under the the white top, sunshade thing, the stable thing.
The archy things over there.
Yeah, right.
So that's where they drilled in
Right.
the early 80s or something.
Yeah, 80. It was. I think the drilling happened in March of '83.
And they go right into this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then
And crushed it up and found crazy numbers.
Well, they just took the assays, and I think they could see free gold in some of the veins. They knew they had something, so kept drilling. And then we had already picked up leases, except for this section right here. That's I don't know. It's just kind of flat there on the other side of the street.
Okay.
That was actually a different lease, and the guy who had that held out for more money than we were going to offer him, and so
this flat area, right?
Yeah,
down
right.
here.
So Tenneco got it somehow, and I don't know the whole details of this.
Right.
So Tenneco brought a drill in here. We were going bingo, and they brought a Canadian guy down here. He was a good guy. His name was Peter Folk, and they were drilling, and we ended up buying the lease from them, and that's where the real high grade was at depth.
Under the flat.
Yeah, under the flat, kind of down by the telephone poles, the power lines and stuff.
So in 1987, this looked total. How did this look different? Was that?
Yeah, it was pretty much the same. Just like a dusty corner of Wenatchee. And when I moved here, Wenatchee, the whole thing was dusty. I mean, I drive into town and like, holy moly, there's sage tumbleweeds blowing across north. It's a little spiffier now if you like strips. Yeah, but.
Well, yeah. What? So you drive to work every day. Where was your office?
Well, originally it was the old Levitt Day Mine over there.
On the other side?
Yeah, so we had the Levitt Day Mine office. And then they built this complex, and then we moved over here in like 85. Production didn't start till 85. I think it was official production started in July of 85 and went till 94. And I was hired in 83, pre-production.
So what was a typical day like for you
originally
in the mid 80s?
Logging a lot of core.
Bringing up stuff like this. And,
we had drills underground and drills on surface. And then we had my colleague in the exploration department, he logged core. And so he logged exploration core and I'd log core. And then I'd go draft it on the map. I'd take my core log and I'd go plot it on maps, all done by hand originally.
Sure.
And my boss was unsure about how the mine plan was going to go, so he had me build a set of levels on, I think, 10-foot centers with all the drill holes, and I had to just do all the trigonometry with a calculator, so the drill holes, they kind of, drills turn to the right, so they kind of go like this. So we had downhole surveys, and I could just do like I do the trig tables in my head. Wow. No, not that good, but
right.
Yeah, but and so I did that. Lost my eyesight. And they never got used either, but at least I got really good at trigonometry.
They never got used?
No, we didn't use levels, we used sections.
Oh.
Yeah, because our mining plan was a vertical plan, right? Yeah, but he was just giving me something to do. It wasn't that bad. I mean, it got me when I'd have breaks between logging core. Yeah.
But you're this kid right out of college, and you are.
Yeah, I didn't go to college till I was 28, so I was like 33 when I got hired here. Yeah. I'm 70, man. Yeah, like old.
Well, I just love the fact that you're right out of the. I mean, you weren't going to school to become a mining geologist necessarily.
No, not at all. I mean, yeah, and I'll be honest. I really didn't fit in with the industry really that well. It's its own thing. I'm a little more of a tree hugger than the mining, but I like the work. The work was really interesting, and so my boss became aware of geostatistics, that whole math that mining companies developed by the French and the South Africans, Danny Kriega, however you pronounce his name, the South African geologist. And so he became aware of that. And this is when microcomputers, right, were just coming out.
Sure.
He sent me to classes, like 4 classes at Colorado School of Mines, and I learned how to do this stuff, and he bought the software package. And so I started doing that more than anything, building block models. And then, just talking about me, but after the mine was done, I didn't fancy going to Elko, so I got a teaching cert, and that's where I first met you at Central. Yeah. I taught for 2 years, and then a former boss, Bill Bond, called me. He was working for Sunshine. He was the exploration guy there, and they had a property in northwestern Argentina, Porquitas, and I went to work for them for 2 years doing the ore reserves and the preliminary work. And that was in 98 and 99 when all investment money was going into .com stocks. Yeah. And silver was only $4.80, I think, in those days, if I remember right. And so they had a math opening again at the high school, so I took it. That's what I did, taught math.
Well, mentioning silver, I forgot silver's part of this story too, is it not?
Yeah, we produced about 2 ounces silver for every ounce gold. And I was trying to think a little bit about what our average price of production was, but it was up around $400 an ounce. So just even at 5 million tons of point, I don't know, what do you want to say? I think our average grade was over 0.3, 0.31 something maybe. You know, we produced well over 1 million ounces of gold. Multiply that by $1,900 an ounce, you're in the billions. Yeah, like $2 billion worth of current value of gold came out of this ground. It's a lot of money, a lot of gold.
And ditto for the silver, as far as like the everything we've talked about with the gold, the silver's right in there with the gold?
Yeah, right. So the silver was 2-to-1 silver to gold, and so yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
But silver, I don't know, I can't remember what silver was when we were producing, but it was, I don't know, $5 an ounce or something like that, relative. Was it? I can't remember.
So before we leave the gold idea here in these cores, is this a one-of-a-kind deposit, or are there, what would be a similar kind of silicified vein kind of story that's similar in North America, let's say?
That's a good question. We need, you know, have you ever met a guy named Bill Utterback?
Nope.
He worked for AMAX, and he was up on Mount Tolman. There's a porphyry moly deposit up on the Coville tribes land.
Oh, Northern Washington?
Yeah,
okay.
It's just across, Mount Tolman's just across the Columbia River there at, what is it, Keller Falls or whatever? You can't see it. It's, you know, and he worked for AMAX, and they were going to develop this thing, and I don't know what happened to the prices. He actually came down here. He was a funny guy. I took him in on the 650 level, and I said, this vein has gold in it. We let people take samples. You know? You're like bashing away at that thing frantically. He was funny. I liked him. He didn't care about the geology. He just wanted to. Yeah, that's the kind of guy I like to give it to. But yeah. But he went on to become the chief geologist at the Sleeper Mine out of Winnemucca in the Slumbering Hills, AMAX's property. And I wonder if that's the same. But there were a lot of people that went, you know, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but there were geologists that put this model into their, you know, their thinking hats and went off looking for these things. So, you know, you have a nice coincidence of things that gave us this deposit. There were structures that kept it confined, right? So the fluids just didn't spread out, didn't become too dispersed so that the grades were diluted by, you know, distance. Because the amount of fluid and the amount of gold's all finite, right? So yeah, it was a pretty special deposit. I used to argue that I was going to start a Cannon Mine Ore Zone Preservation Society, and that this was such a special geologic feature that we shouldn't mine it. We should actually preserve it and let geologists come down and appreciate it. See how far I got. We mined it.
You had some blank looks when you had that vision.
They just thought I was stupid. I was joking.
I mean, the network of, what would you call them, tunnels or
I don't know if it's, I wouldn't call it a network, but yeah, I mean network to me implies sort of an overlapping and cross, but yeah, so all the development drifts, the declines were in the Rio Day site, and then we cross cut from the west into the ore zone. Yeah, but so you'd have these branches out that would end, and then we'd do our stoping off of those.
So how would you get around down there?
We just used John Deere tractors with a little man thing on back that you could haul like maybe up to 6 people in. And then the miners had they had crew wagons. It was diesel, so it's all diesel. There was methane in the rock, and we worked hard, and I should say the engineering people worked really hard to make sure that we weren't classified gassy, because if that happens, as I understand it, the requirements dictated to you by MSHA, the mining safety people, would go way up, and it becomes much more expensive, and the protocols become more elaborate. So we pumped a lot of air underground.
Were there incidents over the 10 years you were here?
Well, there were some pops. So the drillers would drill a new hole, and methane would come out, and then they'd cut the anchor bolts to go to another, and sometimes it'd ignite to get a little blow. There were 3 fatalities associated with this deposit. One before, when when they were doing, when Azamara first came here, they were doing some exploration work and opening up the old drifts that Tenneco had put in B Reef or B West. A slab fell over on a contract miner. And then one of our miners was working with the explosives people underground, trying to get the explosives ironed out. You know, blowing up rock and having it break fine enough it's a science and an art. So they're trying to refine that so you don't get big pieces in the mill. And we also, you know, didn't like to shake town, so we didn't want to over blow things up, because we had people complain, you know, their plates would rattle and they're, you know, we went a little too hot. So I mean, that's just, it's like anything. As you develop experience or gain experience, you develop, you know, procedures that work better, and that's just part of the learning process. But he was with some explosive people, and he ended up in the wrong place, and when the blast went off, the concussion blew him over an open stope, and he was killed. And then right at the end, the guy drove his vehicle into a closed drift, and some material fell out of the back, and the ceiling, as miners call it, the back, and killed him. But yeah, it's too bad. But it's like coal mining. These sediments aren't, you know, they're kind of, it's not, the ground was generally pretty good, but because the mudstones wouldn't silicify, you had these beds that were, you know, zones of separation of slabs. Yeah.
Were some of those drifts truly beneath the city of Wenatchee?
No, that was a mythology that went on for years. We were under the high school, and we were under the hospital, and, you know, we're under your backyard, yeah. And I would tell people, no. You know, in good ground, it costs like $150, $200 a foot to advance a drift, and in bad ground, where you probably live, it's $400 and up. You know, we just don't go driving drifts around for fun. Yeah, there's a group in Wenatchee called Chelan Douglas Land Trust, who's you know, it's basically a local nature conservancy kind of thing, and they've been buying private land around Wenatchee and putting it in the public. Some of it they've turned over to the state to manage, and other pieces they manage themselves. And so this block up here, up to the tailings impoundment, was owned, and we leased it from Tenneco. And Tenneco, I don't know what's happened to Tenneco, but about, my timing is so messed up, Nick.
No, you're good.
I don't know, 10 years ago,
yeah,
Tenneco didn't want it anymore. It was just something that was on, they had no interest in doing anything. There's no mineral potential here anymore. We mined it.
Right.
It was just something that they didn't want to have, I think, partly liability for.
Okay.
And so it was essentially closed, and they sold it, I believe, to Appalachia. I think that's where it went, so the riding stable, so they could ride their horses on. Now, this is state land, that's state land there. But this area up here, and so Appalachia worked with Chelan Douglas Land Trust to build trails and go through and look for any hazards. I was invited to come up here with some Chelan Douglas Land Trust and an Appalachia person and talk about any potential hazards, physical hazards to humans or whatever. And,
what would those potentially be if you?
Like open holes maybe, or you know.
Not cyanide or anything like
no,
that?
we didn't use cyanide. We were permitted for it, but we didn't. But yeah, so now it's public, and it's an incredible resource. It's one of the things that makes Wenatchee a great place to live.
Totally agree. It's like it wasn't an accident. I tried to learn a little bit about this mine on my own. I kept running into like the same generic 3 paragraphs online. You know? Yeah,
there's a guy he was a mining engineer, John Bosdresh, and he was here pretty much for the life of the mine. And he was a good photographer, and he'd go work at taking underground pictures. I bet he has something. Where all the maps went, I have no idea. When I walked out the door, they were all in the map case, but they're, you know, they'd be kind of cool to look at. And you can go through on 50-foot or even 25-foot centers and see, you know, how the deposit changes shape from south to north as it opens up into that mushroom from the stem to the
try to find him.
Yeah, so Yeah, and I can try to do that too if you send me a prompt now and then.
Sure,
But I can
sure.
write his name down for you before we go.
Well, I got it here on the camera.
Okay, yeah, it's B-A-Z, new word, D-R-E-S-C-H.
Okay, good. Last thing. You mentioned that place up in Colville Land or something.
Mount Tolman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a general sense of active or past gold mines in Washington, and what kind of, do you have any sense of what they're doing or what kind of deposits those are? I know nothing outside of thinking around in Liberty just a little bit. I don't know anything
Yeah,
about
well,
any other gold.
there's the stuff up out of Republic, right? And so I actually, oh God, I don't know the name, but Hecla's mine that they mined underground there for a number of years is a vein mine. I went up there. There is a similar Eocene unit up there. I think people also go up there to look for fossils.
Okay, yeah.
I've forgotten the name of it. Is it Yukon Formation or something like that?
I don't know.
But that geology might be available. And I don't even know what's happened to it, but there was Echo Bay had, oh God, what was the name of their property up there? They had a couple of properties. One was Lamefoot, and I've forgotten the other one.
Still up in the Republic area?
Yeah, up in the Republic area. And then there was a property out of a Soyuz.
Oh, wow.
Battle Mountain Gold had it.
Okay.
And that was is that the Crown Jewel deposit? And I went up there and had a tour. It was a totally different geology. Like there was like magnetite, massive magnetite and stuff up there in association. It was just in the surface. I mean, we're on national forest land. There's nothing underground, but and that's been so long I don't remember. But those things, Echo Bay was mining up there. I don't know what's going on though. That would be something to check with the Department of Mineral Resources and see what's happened. But once I left the business, I just kind of left.
Well, just
some people are. Yeah, excuse me, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine.
But some people are, some people that work in the business are really connected to it. Once I left, I became a high school math teacher, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that was okay.